one of the things that we've tried to do since I've been in this place is commemorate International Menopause Day, week, month, however long it is. And we were doing this every year, and we've shared some really important stories from colleagues right across the house, and male and female have shared their stories, and it's been brilliant, but it wasn't enough. And I knew that it wasn't enough, and I knew that, you know, we can't solve everything in the House of Commons, but we can give it a massive focus by doing something relatively simple. And that simple thing has literally grown into a revolution. It's been absolutely phenomenal. So back about just before the COVID, it was in my mind that we needed to set up a group which was specifically looking at the menopause and looking at the kinds of things that Diana told me about, and the kinds of stuff that we know from employers and employees and the medical profession. And we were looking for something to base it all on. We needed to be able just to give the focus so that we could actually start. This is a bigger, more important conversation. And we had all these ideas, and then COVID hit and nothing ever happened. Then when we started getting back to normal in this place, was just after the Queen's speech, and it's something called a private members bill draw. And it's literally where you get a fishbowl, you pick a number, all these balls go into a glass fishbowl, and they get picked out. And if your number corresponds with the name that's been drawn out, then you get to be one of the lucky 20 people who get selected for a private members bill. There's only 12 sitting Fridays every year, which means that the first 12 are first on the list, then the next 8 come second, and so on and so forth. And when I got called number 3, it coincided with the time when we were going to be doing the menopause APPG. And at that time, I had really wanted to do statutory menopause policies, because I thought that, I think now naively, but I thought that if we made companies have a menopause policy, it would work. Retrospectively, I now think that if we get companies to do this voluntarily, it will be more reflective of what that company needs. For example, a statutory policy could include having better uniforms that you can breathe, and I know that's work that Diane have done a lot on. But what if you work in an office? You don't need a uniform policy because you don't wear a uniform. So why are we putting that into a policy for that building or that employer? It needs to be organic. It needs to come from the women so that the employer understands what their employees need. So when I had the private members bill, that was sort of dismissed straight away. And another reason I dismissed that idea is a private members bill has to be completed within a parliamentary year. It has to be relatively uncomplicated, so that I wouldn't have to have several government departments working against each other or trying to communicate a message that would probably get lost in translation, if I'm honest. And it needed to be something which I could convince the government they needed to do. So it was a bit of brain racking going on, and we were thinking of all these things that we wanted to do. And if I'm perfectly honest, and Kate will know this, whilst I think HRT is fantastic because I'm on it, very recently on it, but I'm on it, it was never the main issue for me on the menopause. The menopause itself is such a massive issue. There isn't one thing that's more important than the other. But for this private members bill, we needed something that would give it the focus that people would start talking about it. So all these things were going through my mind. We can do this, we can do that, we can do this, we can do that. And none of it was realistic because we couldn't get it done in that space of time. So I'm having a conversation with a colleague who starts saying that she was going to pick up our HRT and it was going to cost her 40 quid. And I live in Wales. So I'm like, why is it costing you 40 quid? And she started to explain that she had 2 different packets, but there were 2 hormones in each packet because she was at that experimental stage of her HRT. And it was, you pay per hormone, so it's 40 quid. And again, I said, well, why is it costing you 40 quid? And she said, well, that's what prescriptions cost. And it was a little bit like turning a light bulb on. I thought, that's the hook. That's what we need. If I can convince the government to make HRT free for women in England, because women in Scotland and women in Wales don't pay for prescriptions. So that is the one thing that we can do, which will give this a bit of focus. So I floated the idea with the ministers and with the department, and we've written around it. So the bill talks about a lot of things, but what it doesn't do deliberately is make the government do anything. I'm not saying statutory, I'm not saying mandatory, and one of the reasons I've done that is I can't negotiate any further down than what's in the bill. You know, I can't go any lower, otherwise it completely devalues it. But I wanted the government to be able to do this. So we floated the idea, we wrote the bill, and the bill is all but written. I just need to have another conversation with the ministers before I get it printed, because once it's printed, you can't change any of the wording, and that may mean a bill would fall. And nothing will risk this bill. And we thought, right, we'll get a bit of we thought we'll get a bit of attention on this. Somebody somewhere will be interested. Well, my God, the revolution became an explosion. I've never known anything like it. I mean, I've only been an MP for 6 years or 7 years, and in that time I've managed to get other pieces of legislation through, which at the time, well, they still are really important. The Children's Funeral Fund being the most important, and that had attention, but nothing prepared me for what was going to happen when I did this private members bill. I've been on Loose Women. Get me. And Jim Shannon in the chamber this afternoon said his wife was watching Loose Women, and he came through the door and she said, "Jim, you're on Loose Women," because I mentioned him. I mean, that was like phenomenal. And then I met Davina McCall, and I met Kate Moore, and I was having conversations with Mariana Falsham. I met Penny Lancaster. I've gone to heaven, you girls. It was worth having the menopause, because my revolution has made me meet so many fantastic women who have stories to tell, have empathy to share, have love to give out, and are so keen that no woman does this on her own, that we do it all together, that men understand. And I just can't tell you how proud I am that people are opening up to me. I'm getting emails. I'm on this call now, and there's emails coming through from today's debate with women telling me their stories. I said vaginal dryness twice in the House of Commons because it's a fact of life. The reaction is, if the reaction this afternoon is anything to go by, it was phenomenal. Everybody in there was so supportive. Everybody in there totally got it. It was funny. It was sad. It was jubilant. It was exciting, but it was supportive. And what I said when I summed up was that if only I just want parliamentarians to know how much it means to women out there that this place is taking them seriously, and that parliamentarians are talking about something that affects 51% of the population. Is so important to every woman, whether they are young and facing it, whether they're perimenopausal, whether they're menopausal, whether they're postmenopausal. We are at that time when no longer will this be a subject that is brushed under the carpet. One of the things I said this afternoon, and it's true, is that I remember a conversation between my mother and her sisters about one of their menopause. And I was asked to leave the room because they didn't want my sensitive ears to hear what was being said. I was 36. One of my friends just texted me and said, "Listen to your speech this afternoon. I tried to raise the subject with my mother. This friend is in her 30s, and she done exactly the same thing. Oh, I can't be talking about that." That's not a stop, girls. We've got to stop not talking. Men are ready to listen. Men are ready to be empathetic. We have got to stop thinking that what we have gone through is something that should never be mentioned in public. Because what I have found is when I've started talking, and I think I've found a bit of an inner confidence, if I'm honest, in that having said the word vaginal dryness so many times, I say it as often as I say, "Do you want sugar in your tea now?" It's just a words that we use. But what I'm finding is when I'm talking to people and I start mentioning these symptoms, they are saying things like, "Well, I'm having that. I've had that. Oh my God, I'm menopausal." One of the doorkeepers came on to me today, And they, you know, they're lovely people, but they're there with their black uniforms with their gold on, and they're very, you know, very regimented. It's all very pompous up here when you're in the chamber. And he came on to me and he said, Carolyn, no, they're supposed to call you mum, and I will not be called, I refuse to be called mum. I said, if you're going to talk to me, you use my name. He said, Carolyn, can I have a word with you? I said, yeah, what's the matter? He said, I've got to thank you. Me and my wife watched you on telly talking about menopause, and she realised that she wasn't going insane and went to the doctor. That made me so emotional that, you know, that the knowledge I've had from these wonderful people here, and the knowledge I've gained from talking to other women and listening to other women telling their stories. I'm not a doctor. I can't tell that woman she's menopausal, but I can give her an indication that maybe it's something she needs to think about. Colleagues have said to me, do you know, I never realised, I never for 1 minute thought that this was the menopause. Same thing happened to me. You know, I love my doctor, and I'm not going to say anything different, but in 2010, after having a gynecological operation, I really sank into a really, really dark black place. And I'd lost my son in 1989 and had not taken an antidepressant. You know, he was 8 years of age, and I was determined that I was gonna face this, and I was not gonna take any medication. And it took me it took me 3 years to come out of this black, awful place. And I ended up going to university and using that negativity into something positive, so that maybe one day I would have something to offer other people in support or in practical help. And when I had this awful, terrible, dark depression, I literally sat in a pink anorak with a hood up for 6 months, and I just didn't want to face the world. It was awful. And I thought, no, because you didn't take, and I can remember having these conversations with myself. I remember thinking, you should have taken those antidepressants when you lost Martin, because that you wouldn't be going through this now, because now you grieving. And that's how it felt like. I was grieving all over again. Not that you ever stop, but that intense, awful, painful grieving where it's almost as if it's just happened. And so I was on antidepressants, and 11 years later, I'm still on antidepressants. And I went on HRT this year, because it's only been for the last year that I actually realised that I didn't have a nervous breakdown. I was going through my menopause, but I didn't talk about it to anyone. I didn't tell my doctor about anything other than the fact I'm sitting there in a pink coat with a hood up. I only told him about my anxiety and my depression. I never mentioned anything else. I self-diagnosed. And this is what women are doing. They're having these symptoms, they're coping with them, and they are deciding this is wrong with me. Or if they do go to a doctor, he's sending them for tests for fibromyalgia, early onset dementia. And it's not to demonize doctors, it's because they haven't got the knowledge from their training to be able to identify and join up the dots. And Diane will tell you more about that now in a minute. But I'm finding every day there is at least one person who suddenly realised after having a conversation with me or telling me something private about their condition or how they are feeling, that there's a hell of a lot of people out there like me who thought they were depressed and thought that, you know, that this was how it was always going to be. And do you know the truth of it all is we're fabulous. Every woman is fabulous, and we're fabulous forever. And we've got to stay being fabulous forever. And to be fabulous, we've got to talk to each other. We've got to talk to our partners. We've got to talk to our friends. We've got to talk to our doctors. We've got to make sure our doctors know enough to be able to help and support us. And the bottom line at the moment is I'll get my private members bill through next week. Then it will go to committee. And then hopefully within the not too distant future, women in England will have the same dignity as women in Scotland and Wales, and they won't pay for the HRT. But that's the beginning of the revolution, because before we finish, we'll have workplaces which completely understand what they need to do. We'll have schools which will be teaching children what to expect when they get older. We will have marriages and relationships staying together, because people will not be arguing over the fact they don't fancy sex that night or why they've not wanted to have sex for a while. I've had headache for 15 years.